Okay, so we are starting lesson 7 for group 2, which is going to be adding and subtracting of rational numbers. And this is going to be a longer lesson. It's going to be kind of the same thing we've been doing, which is adding and subtracting of positive and negative numbers. The difference is now they're going to be using a whole lot of fractions and decimals. In fact, I think every single problem is going to have fractions and decimals. So um, for when you have more than one fraction, like when you're adding fractions together, subtracting, remember you need a common denominator for those. And we'll kind of work our way through that. Hopefully, as we're going on, you'll remember what we're doing with those. But for the most part, it's still the same rules, where if you have a subtraction problem, you're going to be changing it into an addition problem and then working it out through addition. Remembering, of course, that we're going to have positive and negative fractions. Okay? So, exercise 1 says, suppose a 7th grader's birthday is today. She is 12 years old. How old was she 3.5 years ago? Write an equation and use a number line to model your answer. So we do not have to use a number line for this. You could just go ahead and write the equation out for this. So right now she's 12 years old. How old was she 3.5 years ago? So write your equation, then continue. Okay, so let's have a look at what you have. So you should have written 12 minus 3.5. And I went ahead and did the change. So since it is a subtraction problem, your first step would be changing subtraction into addition, and that means that 3.5 becomes negative. Now, one thing I want to go over really quickly when we're doing addition and subtraction problems is you generally want to be doing these vertically. The reason for that is when you do it vertically, the numbers and the whole numbers and the fractions will line up with each other. Whereas if you write it horizontally like this. So if we wrote the problem like this, everything's on the same line. We have 12 plus negative 3.5, and it kind of gets a little bit confusing what you're going to add with what. If you write it out vertically, where you have the whole numbers lining up with each other and then the fractions lining up with each other, you always make sure that the largest number's at the top, because this is a subtraction problem. We have a positive plus a negative. So even though the sign is addition, we are going to be subtracting them because they are opposite signs. Positive plus a negative means the value is going to go down. So this, even though it's an addition sign, we're going to be subtracting the two numbers from each other. So back over here, we want to always put the highest number at the top. And you could do this with addition also if you wanted to. It doesn't really make a difference in addition because 3 plus 2 and 2 plus 3 are the same thing. On the other hand, 3 minus 12 is not the same as 12 minus 3. So again, make sure the highest number is always at the top. So we put a subtraction sign in and put the equal sign. You can even draw a little box if you wanted to. And then we see we have 0 minus a half. So we have nothing here minus half. And we have 12 minus 3. And you go ahead and work that problem out and then continue. Okay, so let us take a look at what you did. So you had to borrow. We had 0 minus 1/2. If I have 0, you take away half. You can't do that. So we borrowed 1 from the 12, which makes it 11. And then we need to decide what to make our fraction here. Well, since we already have halves, we have 1/2, it makes sense to use the 1 as 2 over 2. It could be anything. It could be any denominator we want it to be. So because this is already 2s, we can make it 2 over 2. If we were subtracting a fourth, we would make it 4 over 4. And if there was already a fraction here, we would add that to the fraction, which we'll probably get to a little bit later in this lesson, I'm guessing. All right, so anyway, the answer is 8.5, which makes sense. She was 8.5, 3.5 years ago. Okay, so let's keep going. All right, so for this is on a number line. We're just going to skip this. 3.5 you could make the number line by halves rather than by wholes. So you could put it like at 0 and go half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. Or you could count normally, like 0, 1, 2, 3, -1, -2, -3, -4, and just go halfway. Either one is basically the same. Okay, so let's just move on from that because we get to. Okay, so exercise number 2. It says find the following sum using a number line. Let's just do the equation version. It's that much simpler. So it says using the number line, so we have -2.5 plus 5. Okay, so this is an addition problem. We have -2.5 plus 5. So again, set up this problem vertically, however you think, and then continue. All right, so the important thing to remember is that the first number is negative and the second number is positive. So as we talked about before we broke, a negative plus a positive means you're basically going to be subtracting the numbers. One is going to the left, the other is going to the right. So if we have a -3 plus a +2, -3 would go to the left, 2 more back to the right, you'd end up at -1. What did we do? We subtracted those numbers. So this is a subtraction problem, or that's at least what we're going to do with the numbers, even though it has an addition sign. So that's something we really have to get used to, is looking at the problems and looking at the signs of the numbers. All right, so which numbers did you put on top? We have -2.5 and we have 5. Which one is larger, 2, 2.5, or 5? So hopefully you put 5 at the top because 5 is larger than 2. And that's really the only thing you really got to get used to with doing rational numbers, making sure the highest number is at the top. And once again, we have 0 minus 1/2. So this is going to work out very similarly to the problem we did up there. Go ahead and work that one out and then write your answer when you're ready. Okay, so looking at the problem, we have -2 and a +5. So is this answer going to be positive or negative, do you think? -2, +5. Which one is larger? Which one is further from 0? Is 2.5 farther from 0 or is 5? Doesn't matter if it's left or right, just which one is further away. And the answer to that is 5. So 5 is further away, so the answer will be positive. Your problem should have looked something like this, and the answer is positive, so +2.5. Okay? All right, so let's keep going. It says, find the following difference and represent it on the number line. Okay, so once again, we're just going to work this out. So this is 1 minus 2.25, or 2 1/4. So let's write that out really quickly over here. So we have 3, and this is 1 minus 2 1/4. Okay, so we wrote it exactly as it's written. You cannot reverse these numbers because it is a subtraction problem. In an addition problem, you can do whatever you want. If you have 4 and you're going to add -2.5, you could switch them around. And that's one of the reasons we are going to switch all these subtraction numbers or subtraction problems into addition, is that way we can move the problems or the numbers and fractions around if we want to. So the first step would be changing this into a plus and then changing this number into negative. So we have 1 plus -2 1/4. Okay, and we're basically ready. So it's a +1 and a -2 1/4, positive plus a negative. This is going to be another subtraction problem. Which number is greater? We have a +1 and a -2 1/4. So for this one, you're going to want to put 2 1/4, the negative number, at the top. That also tells you what the sign of the answer is going to be. What's greater, 2 1/4 or 1? 2 1/4 is larger. That means the answer, when we're done, is going to be negative, and we have to remember that. Okay, so go ahead and write 2 1/4 at the top, and we're going to subtract 1 from it. You have no fraction. with 1. So go ahead and line it up. So here we have 1/4 minus 0. That is 1/4. We do not have to borrow because the larger number is at the top. And here we have 2 minus 1 is 1. We have 1 and 1/4, and that is a negative answer. Okay. All right, so we did all that except the number line, so let's kind of skip over that part. Okay, it says find the following difference and represent it on the number line. So this one, we have -5.5 minus -8. For this one, go ahead and write the problem out first. So just copy the problem as it's written and then solve it. And then when you're ready, continue. Okay, so let's have a look. So hopefully you wrote this out and then changed it to an addition problem. Every subtraction problem, you're going to basically be changing it into addition. So we had -5.5 minus a -8. So the number after the subtraction sign is -8. So when we change it to a plus, so -5.5 plus, we change -8 to +8. Subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. It's the exact same thing. So we have -5.5 plus 8. So of course the question is, which number goes at the top? We have -5.5, +8. It's another subtraction problem. Which number goes at the top? We have 5.5 and we have 8. So hopefully you put 8 at the top. It also tells you what the sign of the answer is. The number at the top, that's the sign you're going to keep. So 8 is larger, and it was positive. So we have a -5.5 plus +8. 8 is larger. The answer is going to be positive. All right, so from this point, we have 0 minus half, which you cannot do. So we have to borrow from this 8 and make it into a 7. So once again, we can change this into any fraction we want. 1/1, 2/2, 3/3, 5/5. But since these are already 1/2, if we need a common denominator, just use 2. So 2/2, 1/2, you get 1/2. 7 minus 5 is 2. And we said this is going to be positive, so we don't need a sign. We just assume if there is no sign that it's already positive. Okay, so the next exercise, I give you a couple of problems to work on, A, B, C, and D. Same idea, except B is a decimal. So we haven't really talked about decimals too much. We have previously with the other group. When we get to that one, actually, let's do this one at a time. That way we can talk about setting up B correctly. Otherwise, a lot of people will probably get it incorrect. All right, so just do problem A, -6 plus 5.5. Go ahead, work that out, and when you're finished, continue the video. Okay, so we have negative plus a positive. So once again, even though it's an addition sign, we're going to be subtracting the numbers from each other. Which number did you put at the top? We have -6 and we have positive 5.5, 5.25. Hopefully you knew that the 6 is larger. So that would go at the top and 5.25 would go underneath it. Once again, we have to borrow here. A lot of borrowing going on. So we cross out the 6 to make it a 5. And then that becomes 4/4. One whole is 4/4. Subtract 4/4 minus 1/4. You get 3/4 remaining. And 5 minus 5 is nothing. The larger number was 6. 6 is negative. So then 3/4 has got to be negative also. All right, so let's talk about problem B, and then you can go ahead and do the rest of them. And this is the first time we've really done much with like the decimals with the whole number. So we have 7 minus a -0.9 or 9/10. So first thing, just like before, we want to change everything into an addition problem. So we have 7 plus, and this is already negative, so we're going to make it into a positive 0.9 or 9/10. All right, so for this one, what you have to make sure of when we're adding numbers like this, like 7, is that the decimals are lined up when you do the addition. So once again, we're going to work this out vertically going up and down. So where is the decimal in the number 7? It would be after the number. So the decimal is right there. In every whole number which has a decimal, the decimal is always there. We just normally don't write it with the whole number. And then for this number, we have 0.9. We need to make sure that this decimal's underneath that decimal and that all the numbers after that line up with each other. So this works out pretty simply. So we have 0 lining up with the 7 and the decimal points lining up, and we have the 9 lining up. Everything does not line up on the right. And since both of these are positive, we have a positive 7 and a positive 0.9. This is just an addition problem. So 0 plus 9 is 9, and we have put the decimal down, and 7 is 7. This is different than when we're doing a multiplication problem where it doesn't matter where the decimal is until the end of the problem. For addition and subtraction, you have to make sure that the decimals are lined up in a row. And this makes a big difference because if you were not thinking about it, you might have lined up the 7 over here because that's the way you always did math. If I said add 14 plus 7, you would write it as 14 plus 7. You would do this, and you would get 21, and that would be great. So for this one, if you did that, if you line up 7, which the decimal is over here, and you lined up this number, 0.09 on the right, this is not going to work. You're going to get an incorrect answer. So that's why when you're doing a decimal problem, you have to make sure that the decimals line up like this, not on the right side, like that. Okay? Sometimes they will line up, but that depends on where the decimal is. Okay, so for this problem, we have 2.5 plus a negative half. Okay, so for this one, we probably are going to have to change negative 1/2 into a decimal. So for this, I will speed you through the process. And you have 1 over 2, so that basically means you divide the denominator of 2 into 1, and that's basically how you would create a decimal. So we have half, which is 1 over 2. The 2 is the bottom number, 1 is the top, so we divide 2 into 1. We have to add a decimal here, and in the division problem, 2 divides into 10 5 times, subtract 10, we get 0. So the answer to half is equal to 0.5. So whenever you see a problem like that, usually you either have to change the decimal or the fraction. You can't have a fraction and a decimal. It just eventually you have to do one or the other. Okay, so we have 2.5 plus a negative 0.5. Or you could just write 0.5. It's the same thing. Okay, so this is an addition problem. Just like the last one, the decimals have to line up. So go ahead and you write this problem out and solve it. See what you get. Refer back to the last part where we lined up the decimals. And remember that this is a positive number and a negative number. So there's a lot of stuff to think about when you're doing these problems. You just can't look at the sign and say, oh, it's an addition sign. Just add all the numbers together. You have to say, okay, this is a positive, this is a negative. What's going to happen? Okay? So go ahead and do that, and we'll continue. Okay, so because it's a positive and a negative number and we're adding, that means we're going to subtract them. We're going to subtract the two numbers. And the higher number is 2.5 or 2.5. 2.5 needs to go at the top, and 0.5 needs to be at the bottom because it's the lower number. The decimals all line up with each other, and the place values after that. So this is the first place past the decimal. This is the first place past the decimal. So they both line up. 5 minus 5 is 0, so that's perfectly fine. Decimals are all lined up. 2 minus 0 is 2. And we have 2.0, and the answer, because 2.5 is positive, and that's the larger number, that has to be positive also. All right. Now the last one, this one's actually pretty quick. We have a negative 1/4 or 1/4 plus 4. So go ahead and work that one out, and when you're done, continue. So the problem, negative 1/4 plus 4, you have a negative plus a positive. Always pay attention to the signs. If we're always going to be doing addition problems, we're never going to be doing subtraction. If it's a subtraction, we're going to change it into an addition and then change the sign of the number that comes after it. So for this, we have a negative plus a positive. That means we're subtracting. We're going to subtract the two numbers, and 4 is larger, so 4 needs to go at the top. 1/4 would go at the bottom. So I already did the work for this problem over here. So 4 was at the top, and we had 0 minus 1/4. So we had nothing over here, or you should have nothing over here. 0 minus 1/4 is not 1/4. You have to borrow. There's nothing here. You can't take 1/4 away from nothing. So we borrow from the 4 and get 3. And then once again, we get to decide what we want this fraction to be. It could be any number with the same numerator and denominator, 2/2, 3/3. But since we already started with 1/4, we might as well make this fourths and save a step. Subtract and get 3/4, and 3 is 3. And this, because the negative is the smaller number, 4 is positive, that's the larger number, the answer is positive. So 3 3/4. Okay? So far, hopefully not too bad. So letter E, go ahead and do that one. Very similar to the one we just did. Okay, so we have a positive minus a negative 3. So over here, I wrote the problem out, 1/2 minus negative 3. And we change that into addition. We do not do subtraction. So by changing that into a plus, we also change negative 3 into a positive 3. So both of these are positive now. We have 1/2 plus 3. They're both positive, so all you have to do is add them. When the signs are the same, you just combine the like terms. And so we have a positive 1/2 plus 3. And this works out really easy if you wrote it out vertically. We have 0 plus 1/2 is 1/2, and 3 plus nothing is 3. So simple, easy problem. Okay, so it says Samantha owes her father $7. Okay, she just got paid $5.50 for babysitting. If she gives that money back to her dad, how much money does she still owe him? Okay, so for this problem, she owes someone $7. So that would be a negative. That would be -7. That's a debt. And then it says she got paid $5.50. So we're going to add that. That's not a subtraction. We're going to add that amount. So we're going to add the $5.50 to it. And then we add those together. We should get how much that she still owes her father. So we have -7 plus positive 5.5. -7, positive 5.5. So hopefully you know this is going to be a subtraction problem. Which number goes at the top? We have 7 and 5.5. So 7 goes at the top because it is larger. And this is a decimal problem. So we want to put the decimal in. So decimal goes in. And we want to make sure that this decimal here with 550, which is right there, lines up with this one. So the 5 here is in front of the decimal. So we're going to write the 5 right under the first place after the decimal. They both line up. And then we have the decimal place. Those both line up. This number has nothing after the decimal, the first place be here. It's basically a 0, but we don't need to write that. So we just write the 5 and rewrite the 0. And that's it. And this is a subtraction problem. So once again, we have 0 minus 0. That's nothing. We don't have to worry about that. And we have 0 take away 5. That's not 5. We have to borrow. We need to borrow from the 7, which is 6, and then this becomes 10. It's a 0 there. We borrowed 1, that becomes a 10. We subtract, we get 5, and we get 1. So the answer to this, how much is she? She's still in debt, $1.50 to her father. Okay. All right, so it says, at the start of the trip, a car's gas tank contains 12 gallons of gasoline. During the trip, the car consumes 10 and 1/8 gallons of gasoline. How much is left in the gas tank? Go ahead and solve that one on your own and continue when you're ready. Okay, so this problem is a little bit different than ones we've done up to this point. So we have 12 minus a positive 10 and 1/8. There's no reason that would have been negative. But when we change that into an addition problem, because once again, we're not doing subtraction in this book, so that makes the 10 and 1/8 become negative. So now we have 12 plus negative 10 and 1/8. We have a positive plus a negative, which means it is a subtraction problem. Once again, which number is larger? The 12. 12 is larger than 10, so 12 goes at the top, 10 and 1/8 goes at the bottom. So here we have 0 take away 8 or 1/8. Can do that. We have nothing here. We can't take it away. The answer to do that is not 1/8. So we have to borrow from the 12. This becomes an 11. And then for this, the best denominator, well, we have 1/8 here, would be 8 over 8. We subtract it. We get 7/8, and we have 11 minus 10. We have 1. So that means we have 1 and 7/8 of a gas tank, or gallons of gas in the tank remaining. Okay, and the last problem for our problem set, it says a fish was swimming 3.5 feet below the water surface at 7 a.m. 4 hours later, the fish was at a depth that is 5 1/4 feet below where it was at 7 a.m. What rational number represents the position the fish with respect to the water surface? So basically they're saying what's the depth of the fish at this point. So he was swimming at 3.5 feet below the water surface, okay? And then he's 4 hours later, he's 5.25 feet below that. So a couple different ways you could write this equation out. Go ahead and solve this. Okay, so couple different ways you could have written this one out. So they're starting below sea level, so we want it as -3.5, and we're going to subtract, take away 5 1/4 feet, or you could have -3.5 plus -5 1/4, because it's going below, it didn't go up, so you could do either one. You definitely don't want 3 1/2 to be positive because it's below the surface of the water. And you definitely don't want to be adding a positive. So when we do this problem over here, it's eventually going to be this problem when we change it into an addition sign. So when we have -3.5, we're going to change that into a plus. So let's do that really quickly. So 3 1/2, I'm going to change that into a plus, and then that would make that a -5 1/4, which is exactly what we have over there anyway. If this was a positive number, we're going to end up with a positive answer, +5, and that doesn't make any sense because the fish don't swim above the surface of the water. So, okay, so we have two negative numbers. So it's still good just to keep in the habit of writing the larger number at the top. So 5 1/4 at the top, 3 1/2 at the bottom. Line them up so vertically. This is just an addition problem because it's negative plus negative. Okay, so now this is the first time this has come up with this problem set, or this lesson. We do not have a common denominator. So for this one, go ahead and solve this out. You need a common denominator for quarters and halves, and then continue the video. Okay, so Best common denominator would be just using fourths, because if multiply 1/2, 2 by 2, 2 times 2 is 4, so 1 times 2 is 2, and then 1/4 is already in fourths, so that saves you one step right there. If you did eighths, you would get 6/8, not 3/8, but you'd still be okay. And then 5 plus 3 is 8. Okay, so trying to get this wrapped up. So you have a number of story problems, only up to 6, so that's not too bad. Make sure you're doing your answers on Google Documents, and you'll likely have a quiz on this on Monday. Okay, so if you have any questions, post it on, and I'll get to them when I see it.